Great. Thanks for having me, guys. Just quickly, thank you to the 1080 family. I've been working with the products now for about 5 years. One of the first groups in North America to have the synchro units and the sprint units. And it's been a lot of fun to explore, all the different things that we can train and measure with the equipment. Certainly not an expert at this point. Probably have a lot more questions than answers, but it's been a lot of fun, and we're certainly excited about the direction of where things are headed and all of the things we've learned over the last 5 years, and hopefully some of the things I can share today give you some insight as to how we do things here in LA with respect to our speed and strength program. So I like to start off, and I'll give you the main takeaways right away, and then that way, if you don't want to listen to the rest of my talk, you can go get a fresh coffee or take a break. But here's really the main takeaways from what I want to talk today about speed training is that you need to skate fast to get better at skating fast. Okay, probably the most obvious and silly statement that I could make, but it's something that isn't really exploited in hockey training. And for a lot of reasons, strength coaches like myself are expected to make hockey players faster in the weight room only. But something we've done here in LA is really explored on ice training, and that's where the sprint comes into play. But a real obvious statement that I want to make up front. We want to build capacity to increase ability and maximize skill. And I'll expand on the capacity, ability, and skill continuum. We want to identify your rate limiting step in the speed continuum, and we want to focus resources at that limiting step. The next obvious point that we've learned here is that players tolerate high force acceleration work very well. Hockey players and team sport athletes are stop-start in nature. We found that in training, they tolerate the acceleration work extremely well. But when we expose them to high velocity work, there's a very finite capacity to handle this, and we feel that there's possibly a very untapped stimulus here that we can exploit and further drive adaptation. And finally, I don't know if any of this actually works. I say that semi-jokingly. There's a lot of challenges in understanding what you do in the gym or in training environments and how it actually transfers to a team sport performance. We certainly think we're onto some good things, but right up front, we don't really know how effective we are at this point. But we're certainly on a path to understand this. Just a quick overview of the next few minutes here with me is I'm gonna cover the NHL season just so some of you listening today have an idea of what our calendar looks like and how challenging it can be to implement this type of training. I'll quickly review our speed training philosophy. I want to talk about how we profile the athletes and how we break them, their abilities down into key tiers, and then how we're going to build the program out around those abilities. And finally get into some of the training examples. I know I won't be exhaustive with that. I want to give you an overview of that training process. And I put there as a paradigm shift. And I think this is another salient point that I hope comes through over the next 30 minutes is that we're really shifting the look and the feel of the program to tackle the objectives, maybe away from what has been traditionally done into a more contemporary program for professional hockey players. So real quickly, the NHL season, we're about to kick off training camp here in another week. We have about a 3 to 4 week training camp. We'll compete from October through April. It's 82 games over 7 months. We're playing about one game every other day if you're to divide days and games. So an incredibly dense schedule. We have a 3 to 5 month off season. If you're in the playoffs and you go all the way to the championship round, it's a very short off season, maybe 3 months. And if you do not make the playoffs, you have a longer off season with 5 months to prepare athletes. Our schedule and the way we move around North America, we have international travel. We're based in Canada and the US. We have 3 time zones to deal with. And most teams will play somewhere between 10 and 12 back-to-back games. So you can see down in the bottom right corner there, there's just an example of the LA Kings schedule this coming December. There's 3 back-to-backs alone in that month. It's a very, very dense schedule. So I just want to highlight the challenge that it is to implement and integrate the type of training we're doing here around that schedule, because frankly, we can't disrupt game performance. If athletes are sore and tired because of one of my workouts, you can be sure that I'm going to hear from it from the bosses. The next thing I like to touch on is just how we manage the NHL schedule. So, like I said, it's very chaotic, it's very dense, a lot of games, a lot of travel. But what we look for, just sort of some of the key things we look for, are larger windows of opportunity, and there's definitely quirks within the schedule that are going to allow us to do things maybe on a larger volume, a larger intensity scale at certain times. So we get breaks. Maybe there's a 3 or 4 day break between games that may present some opportunities. Holidays, okay, Christmas and around the All-Star break, there's some more time that we may be able to work with. And then this year, actually, the NHL is going to be participating in the Winter Olympics, so there's a large break in February. So we look for these little opportunities again to top up on certain qualities that we may not get to do often. Something I do is we look at schedule patterns, and we kind of break it down into 3 days, right? So we have practice day, which would be a P. We have game days, G, and off days, O. Every month we have 4 off days. And we look for these repeating patterns. So you'll see things that look like a PG, PGO. That's a practice game off, or a practice game off, or something else like a practice game off. You might notice that anytime you have 2 games in a row, it's very common to take a day off. These little repeatable patterns allow us to repeat certain training interventions so that we know what works within those patterns. We can give them something that's more athletic and motor driven. We might give them something more high stimulus with power or force, or we might give them something more recovery based or stability based on how that little pattern presents itself. So it allows us to make repeatable decisions that we can evaluate against team performance. So just a way for us to distill the chaotic schedule down into something that's a little more comprehensible. And finally, understand player status. So we obviously do a lot of player monitoring, but there's a grind to the NHL schedule. We want to give them the things that they're not getting. Okay, so they're on the ice virtually every day. They're getting a lot of grinding work, a lot of sort of moderate velocity work, a lot of volume. So we want to make sure that we're offsetting that with different stimulus that we can provide the body, whether that's more velocity work, and that might be on the ice, ideally some force work, and that's where our synchro systems come into place. We might need more volume of conditioning, or we might just need more rest. So again, just understanding player status within the schedule. Quickly, the NHL off season. This is where players disperse. So in a professional sport, they have a union. There's a players union. They have a collectively bargained agreement with the league that has some challenging restrictions with what we can do in the off season. First and foremost, we can't mandate training. We can't force them to stay with us. So they go home. We have athletes from all over the world. We have a lot of athletes from Sweden. We have athletes from various parts of Eastern Europe, obviously a lot of North American athletes, and they disperse all over the place. So once they go home, we're actually not allowed to track them in any way. We are fortunate, though, that in Los Angeles, we have a large group that decides to stay and train with us. So we commonly have anywhere from sort of 12 to 15 of our NHL athletes, and we could add another 10 or 15 of the younger prospect athletes in LA. So this is what allows us to do a lot of the fun work in the off season that I'll get into shortly. So speed is a primary attribute. I say that because the NHL game evolves over time. Different playing styles, different team styles, and roster constructions will start to win. Teams will copy that style. Right now, we're in a very speed and skill dominant cycle. the faster an athlete is, the more dangerous they can be, the more aggressive styles can be. So speed is a primary attribute, and that's what my bosses come to me about constantly, is about how can we make players faster, which is a great thing. And that's how our program is set up to tackle that key outcome. Our off-season program, we generally break it into 4 key blocks. I think I actually later mentioned 3 key blocks, but what we do is by the time we get to September, which is, you know, just before training camp, we really roll into, we call it specific prep, but it looks a lot like our in-season program. We'll start the spring with general prep. We usually do that for 4 weeks. We'll get into an intensification prep phase, which is a 4-week block where we're looking at a lot of max force value, max force stimulus, and then we'll move into a dynamic prep phase, which is a very athletic based program. The intensification and dynamic prep phases are where we do a lot of our speed work, and that's where we're actually getting on the ice with our athletes and doing our very specific speed programming. So touching on the philosophy, these are the key elements that we think are best at improving a player's speed in the NHL. And they're just some key points, but they really sort of form the basis of our program. And first and foremost is we talk to the coaches, the scouts and the managers, and we ask them, is speed an issue for the player? Not all athletes are lightning fast physically, but they play fast. They may or may not be restricted by speed in a game. The reason I bring this up is if the perception is that speed is not an issue, we may allocate resources somewhere else to the player's training program. We don't want to waste a lot of time doing something that necessarily isn't going to have payoff in the game environment. So this is just a key question that we start with. You know, for the most part, most athletes could benefit from getting faster, but it's certainly worth the conversation. The next point here is take low-hanging fruit first. And the reason I say that is a lot of athletes that we get, you know, 18, 19, 20 years old, they're not strong enough to begin with. So we can make those athletes faster simply by making them stronger. And that's the low-hanging fruit I'm talking about. The next thing we believe here is that technique has very little adaptive capacity. The hockey players that we work with, you know, they take anywhere from 500 to 1,500 strides per day. Okay. And obviously in a dynamic team game like hockey, those strides can be of a lot of different types. And it's very challenging to change their technical approach to skating at this point when I inherit the athletes. So we don't think that there's a huge adaptive capacity technique, and therefore we don't waste a lot of time with it. Now, with that said, what we see is with weak skaters, and I put in quotes weak, that these athletes, as we train them in their specific tasks on ice, they get stronger and they tend to self-organize into better shapes and positions. So the technique almost improves itself just by practicing this work. Big shocker, but it's something that was not really exploited in ice hockey up until more recently. Again, I make the point, to become a faster skater, you should practice skating fast. Seems obvious, but something that, again, is not done nearly enough in our sport. Again, I said acceleration is tolerated well. These athletes are stop-start athletes. They like high force movements. High velocity training, however, is extremely demanding on their central nervous system. And we think that there's a huge potential here to tap into that stimulus to improve acceleration and max speed qualities. Now, the profile, obviously, we've been working with 1080 Sprint now for a while, and this was one of the sort of fundamental components of our athlete speed profile. But there's certainly other things that we build on. And the way it works for us is we look at it from sort of 4 key categories, or 4 tiers, I call them. It's a comprehensive evaluation of all relevant qualities. Okay, so this is going to be you know, everything from their physical abilities to some of the more supporting things that we'll get into in a few slides. The 4 tiers are broken down into skill, ability, capacity, and supporting. Okay, they're primarily trainable qualities. But there are definitely a few things that are untrainable or just inherited attributes of the athlete. Now, those four categories, at least the three top ones, skill, ability, and capacity, that's terminology I've borrowed and adapted from my friend Stu McMillan at Altus. It's something that he's spoken about more recently, and I think certainly helps us delineate and articulate our qualities, and it just helps organize how we're approaching the programming once we've built out this profile. So to elaborate on that, capacity describes the athlete's neuromuscular and bioenergetic ability to produce the various qualities of speed related to sport performance. Okay, so these are things like jumping, power, strength, maybe some of the energy system qualities, anaerobic and aerobic qualities. So all of the different sort of, like I said, neuromuscular, bioenergetic capabilities that will support speed. These tend to be gym based. Okay, these are not specific. These are gym based general qualities. As we move along, we look at the ability. And so ability describes the athlete's application of the capacity to specific speed tasks. So for example, when we get on the ice and we're doing linear sprinting, change of direction drills, or max speed drills, that would be the ability of the athlete to perform speed. And finally, we look at skill, and this is where the athletes actually apply their ability optimally in the competitive environment. So can they take their capacity and ability and use it in a game? So the first tier, the speed skill KPIs, and like I said, these are evaluated in competition. Two primary areas that we evaluate this. First is the objective metrics that are provided to us through player tracking. So the NHL very recently have put, basically a little GPS chip in the athletes' pads, and now we have great time motion analysis. We have XY data, and we can look at acceleration and velocity type data. So there's going to be some really nice objective metrics there to show us how they use speed in a game environment. And I think probably one of the more important ones is the subjective evaluation. This is where the coach and the scouts and the GMs tell us whether speed's an issue or not. Whether it's fair or not, they're the ones that make the decisions. And if they think that there's a speed issue, then you can bet that there is one, regardless of what the data says. So we have to respond to that, or at least investigate why they feel that there's a speed issue. So that's our top tier. It comes from game evaluation. Tier 2 is the speed ability. Okay, so I'm kind of working backwards now. This is the on ice abilities and the KPIs that we look at under three categories: acceleration, change of direction, and velocity. You can see that as we move down the list, there's sort of less bullet points, and that's because acceleration really forms the basis of all speed in hockey. It's a stop-start based sport, so we're going to look a lot at that acceleration profile. What we do is our primary metrics are coming from a linear sprint. So we'll use the 1080 on ice. We'll have athletes sprint from goal line to center. It's about 30 meters. And we will look closely at the 10-meter split time, the 20-meter split time. I don't have it there, but we'll actually look at the distance to critical speed. So one of our critical speeds is 6 meters per second. We will sort of reverse engineer that and look at how far does it take them to get to 6 meters per second. Okay? There's lots of ways at spinning these around, but we feel that these are critical areas in a game. And if you can perform well over short distances, you're set up for success over long distances. We look at max acceleration. So our players have the Catapult Clear Sky system. So we have GPS data on the players. We'll just look at straight max accelerations in certain tasks. We've started to explore the ratio force. This is stuff coming from JB Moran's published research and looking at the relationship between vertical and horizontal acceleration, and are there deficiencies there in the initial steps of acceleration. So that's something that's new to us that we're exploring. And another one that comes from JB's publications are the in situ acceleration speed profile. Again, it's coming from the GPS data. At this point, it hasn't produced much fruit for us. It's been a little bit noisy, and we'll continue to experiment with it. But we think that there's still some potential there for the acceleration speed profile to help us understand how athletes accelerate on the ice. Certainly in the change of direction domain, we use a 10-0-10 test. So we like to compare that to the 20-meter split time. And the 10-0-10 for us is something that we'll use to just give basic evaluation of change of direction. We have another test that we'll work with in our training. It's just an S skate. It's kind of arced turns. So different change of direction, but another way of us evaluating the way athletes change direction and use acceleration through the angles. And finally, max velocity. In games, athletes rarely will use max velocity. However, we want to know what that number is. We can achieve that and evaluate that through our player GPS system, and we'll profile max velocity. We got to do that through a flying lap. So, an ice rink is only so long, so we need to use big laps to achieve max speeds, and we can use that to build their profile. The third tier is our speed capacity. So actually working down this pyramid, these are the things we evaluate in the gym. Okay, so these are the neuromuscular qualities or the energy system qualities that will support on ice speed. So from an acceleration standpoint, we're using our counter movement jump as a big evaluator. We'll use takeoff velocity as a key metric. We'll use isometric peak force. So we'll do this in a belt squat setup on force plates. We'll look at how much force athletes can produce irrespective of time. And then we'll also use the 1080 synchro for isokinetic peak force. So we do this in a lateral squat, and I'll get some video of that shortly. But this is something we've worked with now for the last 4 years, where we have athletes pushing unilaterally in a very skating specific direction, and we like to see how much force they can produce relative to body weight. Change of direction, again, we're not actually having them do traditional T-tests or Illinois agilities or anything like that. It's looking at some of the neuromuscular qualities in the jump. So we want to see, again, in the vertical plane, eccentric impulse, and we'll do some rebound jumping to look at RSI. And those right now are the foundations of our change of direction test. This is an area that I'd like to explore more, and obviously Ola talked about it earlier today. However, I don't want to do this off ice. We would prefer to continue to build out our change of direction profile on ice and allow these qualities in front of you to just articulate and support what they're doing on the ice. We do not have an off ice velocity metric. Again, high velocity running or cycling is not incredibly safe for athletes that aren't good at those movements. So we prefer to profile all of that on ice. And then endurance is a major contributor to team sport speed. We evaluate anaerobic capacity and aerobic capacity. We want to understand those energy systems. Obviously, they're not driving high-end speed, but repeat sprint ability, ability to sustain velocity, and do things over and over again over the course of a game and over a long season. Energy system fitness is paramount to maintaining speed. So while it's not traditionally thought of as a speed KPI, we look at it as something that supports speed. And the last one here I have is the tier 4 supporting base. So these are things that aren't necessarily trainable, but things like equipment. We look at the skate and the blade. So a hockey skate boot can be very, very stiff. They can be softer. There's different skate setups that may allow for more or less ankle flexion. The blade and the way the blades are profiled, the hollow. So a hockey skate blade has edges to it. A very sharp blade versus a very flat blade can produce different friction coefficients with the ice, and therefore allow for various performance outcomes. So we want to at least make note of that setup. The environment, okay, so ice conditions can affect how athletes move. We need to know, altitude and humidity and temperature and ice temperature. So those are things that we're not necessarily tracking, but we want to at least acknowledge as part of this. And then I have anthropometry. Obviously, we want to optimize body composition. Fat is not fast, so we want to make sure athletes are optimally lean. We want to make sure that mass is distributed correctly. We want to make sure that mass is, we're not creating top heavy athletes, that we've got big, strong legs relative to the upper body. And then we also like to note limb lengths, long-legged athletes, long torsoed athletes. They move very differently. It affects the gearing ratio of how they accelerate. So these are just things that, again, we may not be able to change leg lengths, but at least we have to acknowledge it and factor it into their program. The profile and training. So ideally, once we've built this profile, we look for gaps. We want to know where an athlete's strong, where an athlete's weak, and again, attack the gaps. And like I said, in this tiering, where's the rate limiting step? And I can tell you that most athletes, the rate limiting step is probably going to be from the ability to the skills. So they probably move well on the ice, but when we put them into a game environment, things really slow down or become limited. So this makes sense. As the environment becomes more complex, you don't tend to get faster. Everybody's going to get slower. It's just how much do you slow down? And we want to make sure that that's a minimal amount. The next one there is how much resource can we direct at the rate limiting tier or the rate limiting step. So if the rate limiting step is the game, we can only play so many games or make the athlete comfortable in that environment so much. That's not something that I can do. We can't play 100 games a year. The schedule is what it is. But if the limiting step is below that tier, how much can we direct at that athlete? And I think that's just another consideration as we get into the training program. And then return on investment. Okay, so we want to make sure that, and this is probably tied into the individual speed plan and herd mentality. In hockey, players love to work together. There's a pack mentality, a herd mentality. When they see one guy doing one thing, they want to do the same. It's very challenging for me to have two athletes do two different programs. And so I might have a very explosive, fast athlete who doesn't need to spend a lot of time on his speed profile, yet when he sees his teammate working on speed, he automatically wants to copy that and follow along because he thinks that's a benefit to him. So we have to balance this out and make sure that all of the athletes are getting what they need, but we're not wasting energy and resources at a level that we could certainly be reallocating to something more beneficial. So in the training side of things, a couple of things I want to consider up front is the content, the context, and the transfer. So content is the training focus on athletes' speed capacity. Okay? So everything in the gym would be content driven. Whereas as we get on the ice and we look at environments that are more competitive, that's more context driven. Okay? We're taking our speed abilities and we're trying to challenge them into something that is closer to the game environment. And transfer to competition will depend on how closely you train at your rate limiting step. So if we spend a lot of time on sort of our tier 3 qualities, yet tier 3 is not a rate limiting step, we'll have very little transfer. We need to identify that bottleneck or limitation and attack that so that we have maximal transfer to the game environment. So a quick visual, and you can see how this continuum might look. The content focus or our speed capacity, those are the things you're doing in the weight room. We use a lot of trap bar deadlifts, so there's a traditional exercise there that helps build general leg strength. We also like to use a lot of resisted acceleration work in the gym. So again, it's general work. I know it seems specific, but we consider that general work. And then we become a little bit more specific. We're challenging our abilities in the third photo where we're on the ice and actually doing resisted sprinting. Okay, so still not super contextual. Okay, athletes don't skate in a straight line for 30 meters very often in hockey, but that's something we want to work on and profile and exploit. And then finally, how does the athlete utilize these in the context of the game? Okay, that's our skill end of the training. So again, as we explore transfer and ecological validity of our training program, we believe that we should be targeting the rate limiting step, which I mentioned previously. We think that games offer the highest degree of complexity and transfer, whereas discrete isolated training would have the lowest degree of complexity and transfer. And that's why we need to progress the program across the off season. Player IQ, and this is not meant to be anything other than a hockey terminology, but player IQ is probably the biggest rate limiter for professional hockey players. So we can get a lot of fast skaters, but once the player is in the game with the other competition and teammates on the ice, things get very slow for some athletes, and some players can maintain speed. Okay, so a low IQ player getting faster may actually become slower in a game because they've compressed time. They have less time to make decisions and probably make more mistakes because they're moving about faster. Whereas a high IQ player who gets faster can become much more aggressive with their plays and can challenge opposition in a lot more with a lot more variety and change of pace. And like I said earlier, we don't really know if this is transferring. We certainly think it does. We've seen some very anecdotal evidence, but like I said, little empirical evidence to this point. So when we write a program, and I think anytime you walk into a training center, you should have a pretty good idea of what goes on in that weight room or in that training center. Okay, so here's some shots of our facility, and I just kind of walked around yesterday and took some of these. You can see a lot of cardio equipment. Unfortunately, you can see a large turf area, and you can see some strength racks. And actually, in one photo there, you can see our synchro systems. So this is something I like to do when I walk into facilities, is try to guess what their program might look like. And ours is a little misleading because we don't do that much gym-based cardio, but you could see that the turf is probably something important to us, and that's key here. Okay, so we have 20 yards of turf, and that is for us is one of the best pieces of equipment. So not only should the facility reflect the program should resemble your desired outcome. And this seems obvious. Again, I'm making some obvious statements, but a lot of times, at least in hockey, we've been challenged with making players faster, and we go directly to strength training. We're doing deadlifts and squats and power cleans and box jumps, all great exercises. But how do they make a player skate faster? Okay, so here's a traditional speed program. Okay, like I mentioned, we've got box jumps and deadlifts and cleans and kettlebell swings. Where is the speed? How is this making a player skate faster? I've made this argument before. Any other sport, you look at all these photos, we have baseball, we have football, we have rugby, we have soccer, we have basketball. The athletes are producing and training speed in their environment. They have cleats on, they have court shoes, they're on turf. But that circle in the middle is a hockey player, also wearing running shoes on turf. This is something that is all too common in our sport. And what I'm saying here is we need to get on the ice, skate fast to get better at skating fast. A very obvious statement, but something that's not done. Okay, so here's how our speed program looks now, a little bit more specific. Okay, so if you look at the far right, at one point we actually had our athletes sprinting on synthetic ice. We didn't have access to ice. And that's another story, but we don't get access to our athletes on ice very often, and that's changing. And now we see the athlete on the left doing some resisted work with the 1080 sprint in the background, and the athlete in the middle doing some specific crossover work in the weight room with the 1080 sprint attached to his hip. So the speed program now looks like we're trying to get faster. Okay, this forms the foundation of our program. And just a quick distribution of how things look. In traditional sense, we would have a lot of general capacity work, very little specific ability work, and a ton of game skill time, right? That's always going to be high. Now in our contemporary program, we have toned back the general capacity training. Okay, we've brought down the volume of traditional strength training. We've offset it with much more specific ability work. Okay, 2 full days per week on ice, supplemental acceleration work in the weight room, complemented with strength training. Okay, so if you watched our program over the course of 5 days, it would look like we're trying to make athletes faster, not just stronger. So our in-season training, again, kind of jumping around here, but in season, remember, we've got a very dense schedule. We want to give them what they're not getting. So a lot of times this is speed work, this is strength work. Okay, they're getting a lot of work in the middle, a lot of grinding work. We want to make sure that we're hitting on the extremes and giving them some intensity. We have to look at opportunities to maintain lean tissue. This is a challenge. Hypertrophy work is very hard to filter into this calendar, but there are key points where we have to bite that off and just take the soreness that comes along with it. But it's doable. It's just a challenge. Like I said, providing intensity. In our in-season program, we skate, we don't bike. So anyone out there that's coming from the hockey world, stationary bikes are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. They're in the pictures I showed you. We don't actually do very much biking anymore. We've changed our thought process. Any work we want to do that relates to speed or conditioning will be done on the ice, not in a weight room. Like I said, we want to top up on sprint distance. So we want to make sure that over the course of 7 days, athletes are accumulating enough distance at 85% max speed and above. So we can top that up very simply through just flying laps on the ice. Okay. And we also avoid post-game training. We don't feel that after a hockey game is the best time to adapt to training. So we do a lot of our work in the weight room, and thanks to the 1080 equipment, we've been able to change our total approach to that. Some quick examples: we use isokinetic lateral force squat. That's something I'll show in the next video. It's become more common now with a lot of the users. We use a 0.3 meters per second setting and 10 kilos. Strong athletes are going to be closer to 3,000 newtons and above. Most athletes will produce somewhere around 2,000 to 3,000 newtons on a single leg. So we've gotten athletes quite strong with that. We use a lot of loaded jumps. We'll do trap bar work with 25 and 50% body weight. We use isometrics quite a bit around the 100 to 110 degrees at the knee. And we will sprint on the bike. We'll do 5-second efforts at usually around 190 to 200 RPM. It's safe for us, but again, very, very little volume, just enough to stimulate the nervous system. So there's a quick shot of our lateral squat. It's changed a lot since then, and there's been some developments in equipment and how this whole setup worked, but there's a very early image of how we use the lateral squat. Off-season principles, we work from general to specific. Again, nothing new. We have 3 or 4 main blocks. We actually introduce speed work right away. It's not something that we shy away from. So we want to get guys moving quickly right away. Obviously, the hips and groins and hip flexors are a concern for us. So we spend a lot of time through the month of June getting guys' hips ready to skate in July. So our speed program that starts in July, we need all of June to get them ready for that. So there's a nice side benefit, which is the speed program doubles as our injury prevention program. It's amazing how aggressive sprinting is on our athletes. So they skate all their lives. Very few of them have ever skated this hard or this fast. Okay, again, it doesn't seem novel, but it is. Having guys skate fast in a straight line is something they don't do a lot of, and we're seeing huge benefit from this type of work. But it vaccinates the hips. The adaptation around the hip flexors and groins because of this high speed and high acceleration training has been a huge part of our intervention program. Quickly on the examples, we'll do 4 on ice sessions in July. So as we work through our off season, we get to July, every single Tuesday is on ice. That's the entire day. With an extensive warm-up. As we move into August, we'll do Tuesdays and Thursdays on ice. So again, all of our work on ice. Resisted sprints are supplemented in the weight room. We'll do 10 to 15 meter accelerations. We will take down the total volume of traditional strength training to allow for that resisted work in the weight room as well. So that's our primary power training now. okay, is with resisted sprints. It's not with jumps, and it's not with kettlebell swings. It's running. We focus on acceleration. We don't really work out much more than 30 meters. So those are very short distances for us. And one thing that we really like is the variable or the accommodating resistance on ice. When we want to do heavy resistance, for years it was hard for us because of the the frictionless environment. And obviously 1080 was much smarter than us, and we never really got to use that setting, and something we kind of remembered this off season. And so how we set it up is 5 kilos until 5 meters per second, and then 15 kilos. And we will sprint them out to 20 meters. So the athletes love this setting. It feels much more natural. It allows them to get moving, and then they can work against the heavy resistance. At that distance, we will get 4 to 6 strides of peak power work. So really, really great stuff. And then we use the flying all-star laps for max velocity. Some key lifts in our general program, again, trap bar deadlift. We like a reverse lunge from a deficit. We'll do isokinetic lateral squat. So that's the one on the 1080 synchro. We'll use flywheel training for lateral impulses. So it's a very quick turnaround with short bursts of work, and our resisted work in the gym. So this is resisted accelerations on the turf. Just a quick example of a reverse lunge. Again, nothing magical, but what we like here is we like the depth, we like the range of motion, and actually in this position get a lot of adductor magnus work. Some of the key drills in our specific program as we get on ice, and all of these listed here are on ice drills. Again, the resisted accelerations, working out 10, 15, and 20 meters. We like to do our free accelerations out to 30 meters. So this is with no resistance, allow them to feel their positions. Typically we'll do resisted first and then free accelerations. One of our favorite change of direction drills are called circle drills, and I have a video example next to show you that. We'll work small arc accelerations and large arc accelerations. We're trying to use angular acceleration to slingshot athletes into higher velocities. And then we'll use S sprints, which is simply linking 2 different arcs together. And again, the all-star laps where we can achieve max speed. So a circle drill looks something like this. It's where an athlete has to do all of their acceleration and deceleration inside of a circle. The center of a circle has a 4.5 meter radius. So every time they cross the dot in the middle or that black tire, they're getting about 4.5 meters of work. So in this specific rep, they'll get 18 meters of skating, okay? And we can change up the patterns here. You can see how aggressive this athlete is on the stop, and maybe a bad example, but these little drills are awesome for us, and we can actually set up an athlete on either side of the ice surface and have them race against each other on the same pattern. So just to summarize, like I said, you got to skate fast to get better at skating fast. Again, the most obvious statement I can make, but something that isn't done enough. I think it's becoming more common, but we have to continue to push on ice training. And this is where the 1080 sprint has been such an invaluable tool for us. We believe in building capacity to increase your ability to maximize skill. The capacity, ability, skill continuum is how we think through our profiling and our training. Identify your rate limiting step, focus the resources there. It's not worth your time building up more and more capacity if the capacity is always already maximized. We have to move our resources to where the athlete is limited. Seems obvious, but again, something that's not traditionally done. And finally, we don't know if any of this works. I'm being honest here. It's a very complex game. There's a lot of moving parts. We feel like we're onto something good here, and we'll continue to explore it, but certainly not going to put my foot down and say that all of this is the magic answer. That's how I see the world. Thanks for having me, guys. My email is there, and it looks like I went a little long, but if there's any questions, happy to indulge.
Excellent, Matt. That was awesome. I know Ola has a couple questions that have come through, if you have time to answer a few.
Absolutely.
Yes. Let's see. What metrics on the force plate are you looking at for takeoff velocity and eccentric impulse, and why did you choose those particular ones?
Sorry, Ola, the metrics are takeoff velocity,
yeah,
and the eccentric impulse.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're looking at takeoff velocity as the sum of the basically the output of that jump. We tend to look at the relative concentric power, but obviously as the athlete takes off the plate, the takeoff velocity is sort of telling us everything we need to know about how they produced ground reaction force and propelled themselves upwards. So it's something that's reproducible for us. It has been shown in various studies to correlate well with acceleration ability on ice. It tends to be at the 20-meter mark where it has the best correlation. But that to us has been an easy one for us to sort of track along. Eccentric impulse, a little less valuable. I think athletes, especially hockey players, have a wide variety of jumping skills. And so it's not something that we feel super confident in, but it at least gives us some indication of how they can break and potentially change direction. And I think the work you showed this morning, it's super intriguing. We don't have a great handle on our change of direction ability. I've argued for years that I don't want to do a lot of off-ice change of direction profiling when we should be on ice. And I think if it didn't come across obvious in my talk, in the NHL, you don't get to go on the ice with your athletes. People like me don't get to go on the ice. And it's changed in the last 2 or 3 years. So there's more opportunity now to do this type of training, to do this type of profiling. So, long-winded answer to your question. I don't know if I answered it well, but those metrics at least are giving us some indication of those abilities.
No, sounds good, and you were onto something there in terms of jumping ability and hockey, and then looking at the eccentric impulse. That could be other sports where that could be more relevant, considering the movement pattern and the gliding stride that you have. Here's one. What exercises will you do for isolated strengthening for the hip flexors in the early off season before your speed training? If anything.
Actually, we don't do a lot of specific hip flexor strengthening. We do a ton of adductor strengthening, and it's probably tied a little bit into each other. So we have and this is probably a whole nother talk, but a progression will work on the adductors. We sort of start with isometrics in short positions. We'll get into longer positions, Copenhagen's. Then we get into more dynamic eccentric loading positions, and sort of our final stage of the adductor preparation would be slide board work. We find that to be fairly aggressive as they're isometrically and eccentrically loading the sliding leg. So there's a pretty extensive progression on the adductors. The hip flexors for us, we're sort of tiptoeing around because a lot of them have tight hip flexors, and we're cautious around making them tighter through any additional loading. We actually spend more time lengthening them and releasing the hip and then strengthening the adductors before the sprint program. And I can knock on wood, but we really don't have any groin and hip flexor issues with that approach. So to be honest, not very much hip flexor strengthening, but primarily adductor work.